27 words. 195 pages as of July 17, 2024. New line. Document content. Text box. Image. 89666 words. 170 pages as of July 18, 2024. Bullet. 70. Ely James. All rights reserved. 2023. Part 4. Chapter 54 Chap 1 Resolve. Rescue. Post-sabotage. For now I pasted in Milner fire trap and Joel conversation so it's be absurdly lengthy here. Milner and he are down when Joel gets rescued from gallows so can't extend beyond this. Only move back. Chapter 54. The title is Milner Caught in a Fire Trap. Overseas correspondent Milner Smallman played the prophet. Too early for 34. Move toward 50 or later. No one exempt. The back, underscore. Preceding the evac order given by the Israeli Prime Minister whose advanced word and warning. The head of the enemy terrorist side. Distancing itself in the face of the reality that was a concerted Allied /swift tablet in unrelenting response, not as considerate and certainly not as humane. In fact found to have foreknowledge of his own group's plot ahead of time. Was given to allow him to both ride out the terrorist bombing the blank of his own continent while reducing the number of casualties on both sides. Aggressor in these persons in the regions, the city of those murdering persons now on the run. Their numbers greatly reduced as grim prophecies continue to be pratt. We're set to be applied to fated conclusions, and short not an end of solace of persons but the end of factions of the Islamic extremist groups in responsible parties supporting them, backed by them, including terrorist groups known to have been sponsored by the Iranian terror machine. Religious affiliation. Ethnicity or party affiliation scarcely contained on leaflets with checkmark boxes next to them with opinions thereupon, opinion polls thereupon detached. The order was given to non-combatant persons to during the entirety of the time of the campaign flee while they still could. Ground force invasion no longer a matter of speculation but mere hours away. As were the murders indiscriminate yet leveled at persons now on offensive, so too was your order in the evac order and discriminate. FOMER. Involved persons. Since Israel was established in 1948 there was a scarce late comparable assault given the numbers of fatalities to point to that persons might fathom the deplorable terroristic deed. In addition to prophetic utterances, so too was the familiar at his quip that said simply never again. A reference to the dreadful Holocaust. Germany without a Third Reich of Hitler as grand terrorist of nations then. During these days were they amongst the first of nations offering to join the Allied forces in vindication against intercontinental terrorism conducted in Israel and against Israeli citizens, whereby 3,000 persons had lost their lives. This number exceeded and infuriating the world at large. USA and the United Kingdom and friends similarly offering resources to Israel in the event that they should require them, and with lives from many a country affected by the mortar blasts and extending campaign similarly encouraging aggressors against Israeli borders, the nations in a post-rapture world involving Christian souls, whose common characteristic was evident in their testimony of Jesus, with another form of compulsory evacuation order given, were for the sake of grieving loved ones eager to demonstrate what their vested stake and interest should look like. They too had persons affected by the egregious acts of terrorism, many of whom were taken hostage. Humanity was still in the earth, and unfortunately so too was the blight that opposed it. Prophet Obadiah and others, including words of Israel's last slated conquering King Yeshua the Messiah, revealing a characteristic desired by many Jews some 2 millennia ago, clearly intimating and overtly saying that only one should of 2 warring kingdoms as a central east force remain. World maps would have to be updated in the very hour of the woes of doom as late Earth's unfinished business, yet so as to correctly chronicle the very transpirations given to this hour of existence. He had his forerunners open wide with the mandate to propagate this new reporter's gospel of evenness before the dark prince of evil would sweep on in to enforce its idea, scarcely by suggestion but by what even the human soul. So often the case was that a given soul was his to possess in the least. Couldn't shield the body from The mind was the battlefield and the soul was so oft the power over top of it. So. And his resistors could ironically hear but terrify the enemy by fully. Away from the technically charged nuance that was empowered by the dynamic faculty that was and is the physical brain. Divesting self not unto the beast's mark and bite but into the power of Creator God instead of the private man's ingenuity hardwired connected to the bowels of Hades. The story of basically all good men. Or really decent human beings. Who found either or both irresistible and compulsory the selling. Point setting the biometrics engineered mark of the beast going by a more subtle name its patent. What are the chances? Pray tell. That of all the numbers the number 666 should then be assigned as the World Assembly Patent Classification Number. Persons reminding that aside from a number evil is as evil does had asked. Completing astute observation with and further what are the chances that same patent on or belong to the man playing God during Earth's greatest trying time where civilization's next breath was weighed in the balance. This man willing to overlook objections made after the fact. What fact? The fact observable that was a person's decision to be inwardly outfitted with his Nasser Hussein's technological system of compliance into fated doom. He knew. So what made her so attractive to the masses? Transcending its ability to throw it off netless some health nuisances he felt he'd finally went for it all and thus planned for less resistance when. Hear you hear yet? Planet Earth's newest visitor and man of the year depopulating orders. He threw his invention and promised all partakers of his very dependency. Machine and strategy and of systematized upkeep its chief characteristic he knew. That was surviving for oneself and ability to beyond 9 lives conquered death. A design all along, a mysterious strain globally appearing like some death speed of the apocalypse opening the door for the dreaded illnesses before the gate was opened under a power that should render both immaterial as non-factors. Find the tablet quote still. Quote side of the fence. Quote even if it were possible how could bodies endure catastrophic life-ending impacts was the question lost somehow to how to without physiologies our own consist at all. Say. Outside of the building the man forcefully beat and kicked at air as though wrangling with an invisible enemy utilizing capsizing inertia against him and while suffering vertigo kicking and tripping all of ahead of him. Behind and to his either sides while simultaneously seeming to be fending off attack from an incensed wasp's nest. After clearing the construct he stepped out of the building crumbled to incinerated dust derivatives. To the wind angrily taking. At wit's end unervingly screaming as a reflexive impulse before becoming cognizant of his wild desperate engaging in a mad foot dance frenzy appearing as though balancing atop a sheet of ice while firmly pressing his hand against his stomach. Fists constructed of fire emissions out of explosions darting in terrific projectiles and chasing like indicating fingers or blossoming emissions as phantoms that both constrict and convulse into audible collapses before Milner shifted his vantage point to face 180 degrees behind. Pivoting only to lose a doomed battle with a choking bout before letting it loose when throwing up the substance from his gut. More so a product of repulsed fear as all around him were the bodies against ground strewn. Only by mistake or happenstance could he pedal in any direction without crushing underfoot what was lifeless and littering the ground. Fires as the asympathetic ravenous beast in the chalky turned scorched. Reddish-brown wall surrounding him that's heat swell heat in the least bit expected to evade. Seeing whatever on this other side of raging fire's wrath that awaited and seemed to beckon for him. Maddeningly. Maddeningly gasping and on sideways slants losing balance before finding his feet again to only scurry in no certain place. Sensing in his own escaping intimation that invisible travel companion accompanying him as he scream and bellow. Now from where he fall yet again. Beneath the motionless bodies that's feeling of repulsion he couldn't elude while vainly attempting to avoid trampling on them. Motionless yet sounding these shrilling cries he couldn't lament them somehow some way he was consisting as one embodied cry in a compounded fury finding him while recoiling from the down position against his grimace-stained face and with each passing second realizing that his voice's volume was buried beneath layers of hyperventilating wheezing sounds somehow sounding like uproarious laughter all around him. These with raging blossoms own shrieking singing tune as 'twas imagined that he hear large invisible fingertips on the perimeter of this fire rage conductor and glass cauldron tracing alongside the crystal rim of glass. From groping like the blind man against layers of air before after falling hard writhing on his back and stabbing his fists into small of back before recovering from the cruel gut-wind evicting pummeling. The sky seeming to luridly shift under the influence of these tall flames as he'd imagined strangely the vast expansive unfold of night was that which he might have escaped from up there as though only landing to earth from up yonder somehow. With all accompanying dizzying swirls of swelling disorientation and what would stabilize only it after his head impacted suddenly making all sorts of new considerations possible for him. If only he'd get to the point of conscious consideration. Diminished and augmented forms of howling and on the opposite audio band frequency shrieking spirits as his wheezing sounds or nature's own here collude with combustible retorts in their grisly song as he imagined that through hell he'd only with each step forward helplessly ensconce and snag himself therein. He couldn't endure much more. He told himself. As he like the drunkard slam against what miraculously seemed to also keep him on his feet only where he against equilibrium's impaled law set against him on a teeter embed himself into only the all of what defy balance and foundation for head or foot. Who is calling out? I'm here. I hear you. Keep talking until I find. Ah, from over top and out of nowhere a gust of wind set ablaze mushroomed in front of him blossoming wide and breathing scorching hot exhalation as he swish. He was again sent to the field of the slain as though pulled from behind. The last thing he'd recalled hearing the voice say was, quote, I think you are really close to me. Make your way closer to the Humvee. Can you hear me? I was sitting inside when the missile struck. What is your dash? Can you make it to the truck? The question painfully disconcerting and adding weight to his encumbered gait. Every step taken seeming to dizzyingly spiral him around in shades of hyperventilation as he hears screaming over top of his own. His very desire to respond to this distressed voice the very vital sign commanding prioritized attention now. With each step forward the hardest question to answer suddenly haunted the only person with the answer. Or who should have had a clue from this one who turned to repeatedly ask, who am I? In fact, where am I? The hard soil around him or the skies above without a stabilizing piece of information for him as he averted his makeshift visor cap assisted gander toward the very sky. Wondering if 'twas night or closer toward twilight and suddenly feeling like he was only breaths away from fainting. The circle patterns in his field of vision like a network of synapses with exploding daggers cutting and zipping about and shooting in every which arresting direction while hemming him into his dance instead of his failing feet. The feeling was, as he see invisible airborne shapes descending upon him. I don't yet know. I hear you and I'm heading over to the vehicle. I came out to find you. Are you inside or under dash? Quote stirring from earlier shades of what threatened waking consciousness from the rear of the military truck. The man hollered again while sounding like he was simultaneously throttled on through and shouting only from a borrowed breath that wouldn't totally unfold or overextend itself. He started to blank out after the haze had transmuted to a Starship Voyager expedition of a kind with peals of flashing light striking inside of his mind as he reeled in hyper-thrust speed as though through a kaleidoscope spinning out of control or like a screw shaking loose from carburetor mounted well and bobbling about inside atop of the throttling engine before sheets of debilitating woos infuriate and steal him away from left waking consciousness. For the second time from the swallowing depth of vortex befriending darkness taken as someone's captive in some place. And a captive he was. It smelled like that he walked out of the building was that. With a smoky rancid taste touched off by the tip of his tongue. And, tugging against his shirt and a frail attempt to raise his hand that he might see what he was wearing he'd found that the protrusive dark was all things but penetrable or touched off with any beam of light whatsoever. The excruciating head pain drumming shockingly against his head with stinging nerves hosting that lightning bolts obliterated encore making like the rave show flashing inside of him. Entering in from one ear and fleeing through the other before climbing in velocity and disorienting speed.